Reform UK are set to decisively defeat Labour in the upcoming Runcorn and Helsby by-election, which, if you don't remember, was the seat held by Labour's Mike Ainsbury, who was charged with assault after beating up a constituent. Karen Shaw is the latest candidate to run, although we don't know much about her apart from the fact that she's a teacher and a councillor from Cheshire West and Chester. Now, no other party has a candidate as of yet. So, Sarah, are we hardly surprised that Labour already has a candidate? Clearly, a robust process didn't take place or any kind of democratic oversight. So what's the chances that she's another Starmer loyalist?
Possibly. I think at the moment Starmer's giving people no choice but to agree with him, but I think people have been quite open about his criticisms of him, even within the party. But I think the bigger question is, does it actually matter? Because I think the reality is that with this by-election, it will be a test of Labour's ability to hold its ground in working class areas, particularly whilst the Tories kind of flounder at the moment. So I think the real fight here is between Labour and voter apathy, and not the threat that may or may not come from reform if it does, which is more of just a right-wing pressure group rather than a serious electoral threat in seats like this. So I would hope that she's not a Starmer loyalist, but I think she kind of needs to be. But I don't think Starmer's that popular at the moment. So yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah, I was looking at some polls, and a Lord Ashcroft poll came out, and it shows that Reform are ahead. It's quite a decisive lead, 5%. And this is, of course, before all candidates have been selected. And actually, the date of the by-election hasn't been decided. But there was another poll that came up that had Labour ahead. I would say that in reality, Reform are sort of ahead, especially given the reason why this sort of by-election was called. I think, though, a potential chink in the armour is the recent civil war between the party and Rupert Lowe. Do you think that could affect their chances, or do you think this this civil war, shall we say, is actually kind of overblown and electorally they'll be fine?
So yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like this civil war between Reform and Rupert Lowe.
And we love to see it, don't we? Finally, the right are fighting each other. So I'm really happy.
Yeah, no, 100%. But the party thrives on being a bit of a protest movement. But it's also a party that's incredibly and fundamentally unstable. And Lowe is just the latest in a long line of like internal rifts within Reform itself. But I think even with like interpreting the polling that you've given, I think especially from sources like Lord Ashcroft, I think we have to be like quite critical, because these polls are often commissioned to make a political point rather than give a neutral snapshot of the electorate. But that being said, if Reform UK is polling ahead, then I think it says more about Tory collapse than it does about any real, groundswell of support for Reform. And we've kind of seen it before, like with right-wing protest parties kind of gaining this temporary boost in by-elections, but kind of failing to convert that into like a national electoral success. So I think pretty sure it happened with UKIP. Like they were polling at similar levels in the mid-2010s and then ultimately collapsed when it came to an actual general election test. So I think the same could actually happen with Reform.
What's interesting, look, I think that I would say they're not a protest party. I think they have had electoral success. Getting 5 seats in your first proper general election is a massive feat. What is very interesting is when you look at local council elections, the Green Party are doing phenomenal. I think they've got 800 councillors nationwide. Clearly a more of a grassroots party. Despite the fact that Reform are polling well nationally, they're basically first place. Given the media attention, they don't get many councillors elected. So there's kind of a disconnect what's going on in the sort of local area and national sort of politics. But I would see by-elections as national politics. I know it's a local seat, but when it's an MP, to me, it's about putting them into Parliament. So for me, I expect Reform to win, because I think it's also the trend with Labour, both Labour and Tory losing support. Reform are hoovering up, and also it'd be very hard to convince people to stick with Labour when the person who lost the seat was the guy who beat up a constituent who's got how many? Has he got like 10 weeks in prison now for it?
I think
So,
something like that, yeah. I
yeah.
can't remember.
Do you think that these sort of civil war things going on in Reform, are they just sort of media noise? Or do you think this could hurt them electorally? I know it's a hard question. It's asking
No, but it's a good
hypotheticals,
question.
but
It's a good question because it's the question that I had on my mind. I wanted to ask you, like, could this infighting hurt them electorally? Possibly. I mean, unlike Labour or the Tories, who are, and I keep using like, these main parties, but Reform doesn't have the. I don't believe it has the infrastructure to absorb like factional disputes. I think it relies almost entirely on its public image as a united opposition to the status quo. So any sign of like internal chaos could potentially undermine the main thing that they have going for them, and that is, I guess, positing this illusion of being a coherent alternative, a cohesive alternative to mainstream politics, if that's the verbiage we can go with. But if reforms start looking like just another bickering political outfit, then I think they lose the one advantage that's helped them gain the traction among disillusioned Tory voters, and that is the sensationalist ideals of refugees and immigrants and the NHS. Like, because we all know they have really, really shit policies, and they've been able to kind of tap into the social resentment that many disillusioned Tory voters were feeling in the first place. So the minute they start bickering, it highlights, I think, the deeper structural weaknesses that they have, the internal disputes that are going to really, really tear apart their whole their whole image.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.